Does this sound like your child? Uh, this is a child who is 17 years old. Actually, the mother writes 17 years and 9 months, which obviously coming up on 18. But increasing processing speed to help with college lectures, reading comprehension, and test taking are her concerns. The other thing we know about this child is that he's been struggling in school for years. So this is not something that's new. It's something that has been an issue. And of course, college is not going to be any easier than elementary school and secondary school. So whatever learning issues there were are simply going to be continue to be a problem. And really, as the workload and the demands on learning and on executive functions increase, which they do in college, that's going to be even more of a challenge. So, you know, uh, hear from a lot of people that they would like to see their child's processing speed increase. Usually, what that means, or usually what they will tell us, is that it takes them a really long time to get their work done. They might even have difficulty getting started on their work. They might uh, take a long time to respond when somebody asks them a question. And those are indeed symptoms, suggestions that processing speed can be an issue. And in fact, low processing speed is one of the top skills that, or I really should say the bottom skills, the skills that children struggle with the most when we work with them on helping them understand their cognitive skills and develop them. And of course, processing speed comes into play when we're looking at college lectures and thinking about how to keep up with them. We often hear from kids, not just that it takes a long time, but that they have difficulty keeping up, that they are constantly they're just a little bit behind. The teacher talks too fast, the teacher goes too fast, and most college professors are not going to slow down. That is, they talk at the speed that they always talk at, trying to get as much content into that class period as possible, or into that lecture, or into that online resource, whatever it might be. Thing to remember, though, also about trying to keep track of a lecture is that it's not just processing speed. There are other cognitive skills that come into play and are really important when we're talking about things like the ability to track a lecture and to be able to take notes at the same time. So working memory, which is our ability to hold information in our minds while we think about it, is one that also comes into play and can be a weakness for lots of kids. It's that ability to hear what the teacher is saying, what the professor is talking about, and take notes at the same time. So it's ability to hold information while we're doing something, which in this case would be taking notes. Now, the student's mother also talks about difficulty with reading comprehension. And so reading comprehension can also has a couple of components, and one of those can absolutely be working memory. We don't know for sure in this case, of course, but when I hear processing speed and reading comprehension, then I tend to, that's where my mind tends to go, because working memory is such a tremendously important component of reading comprehension. If you think about what is happening when you're reading, you're going through the text, you're taking in pieces of information, you're holding them in your mind while you think about them. Whatever's going on that you're holding in your mind, you have to compare to what you already know. So your mind is always trying to make sense. It's always trying to connect what you're taking in to information you already know. Does this make sense? Does this have meaning? Does it fit? Or does it contradict things that I thought before? All of that thinking, all of that conscious processing of information takes place in working memory. Working memory is our only conscious processing. And so if it's consumed with other things, let's say we have difficulty with writing with a pencil or a pen, the mechanics of it are challenging. Our conscious processing is taken up with that, with trying to take those notes, rather than necessarily trying to make sense of what we're reading. And so reading comprehension can suffer from working memory limitations. Also, when we get to college, we have to learn a tremendous amount of information, pretty much whatever domain, whatever subject we may be studying. There's just a tremendous amount, whether it's formulas in math, whether it's what different kinds of artists look like, work looks like in art history, whether it's vocabulary and rules of pronunciation and syntax in a foreign language. There's just a lot of content, chemistry, it doesn't matter. And all of those require us to learn a tremendous amount of information. Learning information, being able to store it in long-term memory and retrieve it later, depends on certainly working memory, because we have to hold it in our minds and process it enough to get it eventually into long-term memory. It's when we're studying and things like that. But we also need to use our ability to remember visual information and remember verbal information. And that can be different. So one of the things that we frequently see is an individual who can remember visual information, but really struggles with verbal information in terms of committing it to long-term memory, or vice versa. And of course, that is going to impede their ability to take in, store for the long term, and be able to retrieve information about the subject matter. And it will, visual and verbal can have different impacts depending on the subject matter. But regardless, we can learn to use strategies that appeal to our strengths. So for example, if we have stronger verbal memory, we're going to want to draw diagrams, draw pictures, make sure that we look at the images in the textbook and not just skip over them. Those have really important information for us if we've got good visual memory. If we've got stronger verbal memory, we're going to want to summarize things. We're going to want to take notes. We're going to want to annotate the book. We're going to want to reteach the information to someone else. So working with a study partner or something like that, and explaining it, if your strength is verbal memory, is something that's going to be really helpful. Now, we also know that we can strengthen these skills. So I wanted to do a couple things today in this little conversation that we're having, one of which was to provide some tips. And so sometimes people have a pretty good idea whether their verbal memory or their visual memory is stronger. And so if you do find it, and you can test this out, try learning vocabulary words, for example, with pictures. Try learning it by coming up with a number of different ways to describe it, and see which of those works for you. Once you know, then continue to use those strategies, because it will really help you and make the process of studying much easier. There's some other things, tips. So this mother also talks about tips for test taking, or concerns about test taking. And test taking can be really stressful for so many of us. And we don't often learn the best practices of studying for a test or taking a test. And there are a couple of things that come to mind, particularly for someone who might struggle with processing speed and or reading comprehension. So very often in a test, we are given something to read, and then we have to answer questions or explain it or somehow expound on that. Usually we take the information in the order it comes. So we read the passage and then we look at the questions. I'm going to suggest that we do the opposite. Read the questions first and then read the passage. When we do that, we prime our brains to look for the information that we're going to need. It'll give us a sense of what the whole passage is about, what kind of information is embedded in it, what kind of information is contained that we need to be able to answer questions about later. So that's one tip. Processing speed, my processing speed tip, I suppose the number one thing is if you come across a question that is you're not sure how to answer, or that is difficult, or that you know is going to take you a bunch of time, you might simply mark that question and skip it just for the time being, and then come back to it later. So if there are questions that you can answer fairly quickly, you might be well served to go ahead, answer those questions and address them, get them done, and then go back and work on the things that might take you a bit longer. And that's probably, regardless of your processing speed, it can be a good strategy. Just don't forget to go back. Don't get to the end and say, oh, I'm done. Always get used to the idea that you're going to have to go back, check your work. If you've got time, there's no reason not to go back and check your work. Make sure you've answered all the questions and those kinds of things. It seems obvious, but I see kids do this all the time. They've marked a question, they've skipped it, thinking, oh, I'll come back to it. And they get to the end and they just submit their test. And it's silly because it's an easy mistake to catch. And when we catch our own mistakes, we will do better on tests. So the last thing I want to just talk a little bit about is how skills like processing speed and verbal memory and visual memory and working memory can be strengthened. So there's some basic, principles of developing cognitive skills that are really important to understand. So, for example, we can develop processing speed for a specific thing. So if it takes me, 10 minutes to make my bed, and I practice making my bed over and over again, and I practice the parts of it, just like if I was practicing a piano piece, I'll, take different parts of the piece that I'm trying to learn and practice those. And I can get better at doing a specific activity by repeating and rehearsing and practicing that specific activity. But that isn't going to do much for my overall processing speed, which is not just the activities associated with one particular thing, but globally, how our brains make sense of things, how quickly they can respond to them. And we do see that when we have the right kind of cognitive training, see very significant improvements in processing speed, in working memory, in verbal and visual memory, in our other executive functions, in attention, in reasoning skills. All of these skills can be improved with a comprehensive, integrated cognitive training. Now, what does that mean? Comprehensive means that you have to address cognitive skills in a very broad manner. So just like when you go to the gym, you don't just work out one part of your body. That part of the body might get stronger, but it won't all work together. So we have to do it comprehensively and in a way that integrates these skills, that gets them to work together. Our brain is a very integrated organ. It manages what it does, has a lot of different systems and processes that all work together, and have to be working all at a very automatic level in order for them to be working efficiently and accurately. And in order for us to be able to do things like sustain our attention or hold things in working memory, or commit things to memory, or to reason through problems in a way that doesn't cause us to say, oh, how do I do this? It just happens, when those skills are stronger. So when processing speed is stronger, it just doesn't feel like you're always behind. And one student once who said, oh, well, my teacher is talking faster these days. Probably not. That science teacher had been talking science at the same speed for 30 years. But it seems like it's slowing down. It seems like the text is easier to understand because it's making sense. When those things are automatic, it's just like walking. When you first learned to walk, you took a couple of steps and fell down until you learned the balance, until your brain learned the whole sequence and combination of muscles that had to interact to produce the skill of walking. It was really challenging. And now you don't think about it at all. You don't think about driving the car, even though when you first learned to drive a car, it probably took all of your attention to the mechanics of actually making the car go and work. So if you'd like to learn more about that, I'm going to post a link in the chat for this little conversation. Encourage you, we have a parent training session that talks in depth about cognitive skills. When parents have participated in it, we hear so many times how helpful it was, how they'd never heard this before. So if you've never heard someone tell you that there are underlying skills like processing speed and working memory and attention, or if you don't know what any of those are, or you've never heard terms like sensory integration or executive functions, it is vital for you to learn about them. And we're delighted to provide this free training session as an opportunity to do just that, to learn about them, so that your child doesn't have to go through years and years and years and end up in college still struggling with learning. So I encourage you to do that. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and of course, Happy New Year.